Hi team, greetings from sunny Suffolk in the UK. I'm trying something new today and let's see if it works. I was in London yesterday and had a number of meetings, and someone asked me, they said, so what is Emerging Leaders? What is it about? Is it a training company? I said, no, it's so much more than just a training company. So, well, what is it? What is Emerging Leaders? So I thought I'd share with you what I shared with them because I think it's important, and by doing it in a video, you can hear it from me firsthand. And then I hope we'll interact and debate and talk about it and create the future together. So, when someone says to me, what is Emerging Leaders? I say it's three things. The first thing is Emerging Leaders is an idea. It was an idea born in the slums of Lusaka in Zambia. It was an idea that justice should prevail. And the justice means this, that where you are born in the world should not determine your access to the very, very best. And so for me, Emerging Leaders was, how do we bring world-class leadership development into the world's most vulnerable communities? That's part of the idea. The other part of the idea is around potential, is that everyone on planet Earth is a leader at some level. Everyone has a story to write. Everyone has the potential to write that story. And that's where it then links with justice. A lot of people just don't get the chance. They don't get the same opportunity or input than someone else. So what is Emerging Leaders? It's an idea that everyone's a leader, whoever they are, and that every one of them should have access to the best, no matter how vulnerable their community is. So that's the first thing. What's the second thing? Second thing is around accessibility to knowledge. So if people are going to get access, because the lady I was talking to yesterday was, her family was Palestinian, so they were refugees. And she said the only difference between me and the other women that I know is I had opportunity, I had access to knowledge. So what does that mean for us? Access to knowledge is our programs. It's Lead Now. It's Leadership for Life. In some instances, it has been and still is Leadership for Hope. But what we're saying is, how do we bring access to these timeless principles around how to lead yourself? How do you lead your finance? How do you lead projects? How do you lead groups and teams of people together? How do you go on developing yourself and your leadership muscle? How do you get access to that kind of knowledge? And our training does that. But more than that, one of the things I'm working very hard on at the moment is that all that training will be available on an app so that you can share it with your friends. It will keep you fresh. It will keep the quality of what we do clear and high. And you can share it with everyone that you train this app, and they can then sit down with their friends in the evening and look around their smartphones and share the app. So all this is around accessibility to knowledge. How do we make that accessible? What's the third thing when someone says, what's Emerging Leaders? Well, I've always said right from the beginning, I said, look, our ambition is not to become a big organization. We want to be a movement. You will never hear in 5 years' time that Emerging Leaders employs 500 or 1,000 people around the world. You're not going to hear that, because that's not what we're about. We're about creating this movement around justice, around potential, around accessibility. So when I talk about movement, what do I mean by that? You've got to change the conversation. That's the real issue here. Number one is, if you don't change the conversation that's going on inside my head or your head, if I'm not having an intelligent conversation with me, I won't have an intelligent conversation with you. If I'm not thinking through things here, I won't be able to talk about things with you there. So if I want to change the conversation between people in the community, the first thing I've got to do is change the conversation in my head. One of the ways we do that, obviously, is addressing poverty mindsets and leadership mindsets. We're trying to shift that conversation that is going on inside our heads. See, it's easy to look out there into the issues in our communities and say there's terrorism, and there's abuse, and there's bullying, and there's violence, and there's sabotage, there's all those things. But actually, all those things are in here. I have an inner terrorist who wants to bash people up. I have an inner violent person. I have an inner saboteur on some days. I have someone who wants to start fights in their head. I have an inner critic. I have an inner bully on some days. I have an inner tyrant in myself on some days. I've got all these voices, these conversations that go on. But I've also learned that I can have a different conversation with myself, which is about loving myself, affirming myself, valuing myself. So when we talk about creating a movement, the movement is we want to change the conversation on the planet. And step one is to change the conversation that's going on up here. The second conversation we want to change is around oppression. You see, all oppression is rooted, and many of you heard me quote this before, around the pedagogy of the oppressed, that untransformed people will have untransforming conversations. Untransformed teachers will not have transforming conversations with pupils. Untransformed parents will not have transforming conversations with their children. Untransformed community leaders won't have different conversations in the community. Untransformed gang leaders won't have different conversations in the gangs. So we have to change the conversation. Firstly, in here, then in our hearts and our characters, to shift the conversation here between you and me, to shift it away from the oppressive conversation into a transformative conversation. So the next thing around changing the conversation, this movement, is all conflict ultimately is reduced down to the inability of two people to have a conversation with each other. And we can point to all the issues in our communities, whether it's burning health centres or schools in South Africa or whatever it may be in whatever community you're working in right now. All conflict ultimately is rooted in two people failed to be able to have a conversation. And that needs to change. And we want to equip people here, and then in that community to have a different conversation. Now, the next dimension of changing a conversation is around influence. There's about 450 academic definitions of leadership in the world. And you know what? All of them, interestingly, have influence at the heart of the definition. It's what they all share. Now, influence is about how my story can help shape positively your story. That's around influence. So all leadership, whether it's personal, relational, small groups, teams, national, whatever, it's rooted in influencing other people. And what is influence? It's a conversation that is rooted in who you are, your heart and your character. And then the last bit around creating a movement where we're changing the conversation on the planet are role models. Role models of people who are doing life differently and having different conversations. And that's you. You know, those of you who are delivering these trainings in your slums, in your townships, wherever right now, under the banner of emerging leaders, it's because you have become a role model. You've grown the conversation up here, the conversation here, who you are, and you've become a role model in your community. I remember when we worked across central Malawi, I engaged all of the chiefs from the districts and the villages right at the front. And I got them to select all the young people that they wanted on the training. I said, choose me 3 girls and 3 boys that you think have got high potential in your community. And they did, and they presented. And the interesting thing was, you know what? A lot of those young people, after the training and as they learned to lead themselves, were invited by the chiefs to sit on the community leadership committees because they'd become role models. And the community recognized they were role models, and they wanted those young people seated with them. So being a role model engaged as a role model with all of the dimensions of community transformation, shaping the story in the groups and the young people and the teams and the schools around you. So what is emerging leaders? It's an idea. It's an idea around justice and potential. What is emerging leaders? It's around accessibility to knowledge. What is emerging leaders? It's around transforming the conversation on the planet, a conversation that places inestimable value on people, realizes their potential, and facilitates, has a conversation that helps them while they are also helping you to go on seeing the release of that potential in relationships, in individuals, in groups, and in whole communities. So that's emerging leaders. That's the mission. That's what we're about. That's the movement, if you like. So these are just a few thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to get your feedback and your interaction and how you are saying you think we can grow this movement. So have a great day. And you'll see behind me is the world, because we want to change the conversation on the planet. Have a great day.